So, I saw Longlegs last night, and I don't exactly know how I feel. Alright guys, welcome back, GM Light here. Like I said, I just saw Longlegs last night, and even after a whole day of thinking about it, processing, I really don't know how to think. And kind of just as a pretext, I went in completely blind. Obviously, with a new original horror movie, you kind of want to avoid things. Pretty much every horror movie trailer is a big old spoiler. A lot of people overhype before the movie comes out, and they create the wrong expectations. This is a movie that's been buzzed about heavily, people are talking about it. It ended up having just a crazy debut, and that's a very exciting thing in and of itself, but I really had no idea about what the nature of the movie was. All I knew was Nick Cage horror movie. I assume maybe Longlegs was an urban legend or something like that, but I really had no fucking clue. So I got to just go in and just watch it, and it's weird, and it's a lot to process, and that's why I'm here. Of course, there was so much buzz surrounding this movie, and as a horror fan, a guy who runs a horror channel, I'm obviously going to take interest in this, avoid everything like the plague, because I just want to go in and be a blank slate to watch this original new horror movie. And it's just simply the fact that the story takes so many turns, and it's just a lot to process. I'm not going to be giving any spoilers, of course, just generally talking about my feelings about this movie, and, you know, that I kind of feel mixed on some stuff. But overall, don't get me wrong, I skew positive on this movie. There's just some things, story-wise, I don't know how I feel. Hands down, the performances from Micah Monroe and Nick Cage are the standouts of this movie. I feel like Micah Monroe just gave such a unique performance, especially for a protagonist in a horror movie. I think sometimes characters try too hard to be quirky or weird when they try to make a movie like this, or when they try to have a performance like this or a character like this. I feel like she doesn't fall into those typical things that they usually do. She's very reserved, kind of, you know, quiet, awkward, but I don't think it's in a way that's cringy or forced. But it's also very different from the typical role that a character like this would play. She's an FBI agent hunting a serial killer, and usually with that you could fall into the stereotype of the badass, tough as nails FBI agent that of course has some vulnerabilities, someone who does something very by the book. She's really not that. She's very different from this kind of character to where you'd even be kind of surprised that she'd be in a line of work like this. It's just a very different flavor of a version of this character. It's something that I feel like I don't get to see very often. And then of course you have Nicolas Cage, the man himself, the legend, one of my favorite actors of all time. And of course you expect it, but he puts in a hell of a performance in this movie. It's a very odd character, and he has such a very interesting and different vibe about him. He could be very batshit crazy, he could be very actually intimidating in certain scenes, very unnerving. Something that I don't want to overhype. I'm a horror guy, I have a horror channel, I'm obviously pretty numb to most things, all things horror. I don't really get scared by stuff, but there were actually some scenes with Nicolas Cage in this movie that, you know, just kind of got under my skin a bit. I don't want to overstate it. They were just little moments where I found him very creepy and convincing. A character like this, you have to play so convincingly that anything short of that insanity, it's just not going to be believable, and honestly could have become laughable. I even think there's a few times where he actually does push it to the limit in that respect, but overall there's also some scenes where he is kind of intentionally a bit funny or comedic, but at the same time you still feel that fear from his character, just that insanity, because people like that just, they really scare me. You get a vibe from people sometimes, just like a weirdo that you could just totally see having just malice in their heart or something, anything like that, just something about them that really unsettles you, and he so convincingly plays that in this role. And even along those lines, like I said, going into this movie having absolutely no expectations, no idea what this was, I actually couldn't tell throughout a good amount of the movie whether Nicolas Cage's character Longlegs was actually human or supernatural. Since I just had absolutely no idea, I couldn't tell what the limit to this character was, and because of the way that he played him with such an otherworldly presence, I really didn't know for a while. At least until it definitively kind of answers that. But like I said, he gives off such a creepy vibe to where he almost just doesn't feel like he's a human. And something scares me about that. A very uncanny valley type deal where this person, for all intents and purposes, is a human, functionally acts as a person, but there's just something, you know, a bit off about them that makes you uncomfortable and makes you feel like there's some kind of threat there and that this isn't human, or that it's something pretending to be. And that goes into basically the overall feeling vibe surrounding this movie. I kind of watched this in a bit of a weird state because I was honestly pretty tired when I went to go see this movie. Not the movie's fault, but at points I could get very tired. But there's actually kind of a liminal, trippy, and dreamlike quality to this movie that almost enhanced it a bit. Obviously, just being tired in general kind of hurts a movie overall, because instead of just wanting to get engrossed in the movie, you're tired and you want to leave. But I think in some respects, the fact that my brain wasn't working at its full capacity actually kind of helped soothe me into the overall vibe of this movie. It does a really good job of what it chooses to frame, what it chooses to focus on, how it uses images, and 100% how it uses sounds. I think that that's so much of what dictates kind of the scares of the movie. It's just playing with your expectations of when things will happen, when the boot's gonna drop, when the scary thing's gonna come out. And it does that stuff in such an unconventional way that I found to be probably the most impressive part of the movie. It's the mood. It's the way that it is able to hold your concern and your uncomfortability for long periods of time. And that's not very easily achieved, especially in today's day and age. But that is also, too, the big thing that I'm going to remember when I take away from this movie. It's just the vibes it gives. There's also just some cool retro graininess to it. I love when horror movies do that because it puts you back in a time and a place. It's very creepy. And especially that first scene of the movie, I found that to be, like, there's no other word for it. I hate to be a plagiarist, but it's chilling. It's extremely chilling. It's very creepy and unsettling. I don't know if the rest of the movie really has a scene that kind of matches what went on with that first scene, but it keeps it throughout the whole movie. That whole vibe, it's able to keep up. There's some kind of odd decisions in the movie, and I think that some of it was just my overall experience watching it kind of being an odd experience. I went in completely cold, didn't know what to expect, and this movie does take a lot of turns, play with expectations. They make shifts, pivots throughout the story, and some of that can be pretty jarring. And although it's not entirely the movie's fault, to a certain degree, I don't think that they could have fully explained what was going on through just showing throughout the movie and us being able to piece together. I actually think it's kind of damn near impossible, but it does unfortunately kind of fall into that trap of having a scene where someone explains everything that's actually going on, and then the ending feels a bit rushed, even if it kind of felt like it was the logical setup conclusion based on the information they gave us. But like I said, with that whole situation of having the scene where it's explained, although I felt like it was entirely necessary in this movie, you have to think that to a certain degree, if the audience isn't going to be able to figure this out, if these ideas are things that you can't execute without just telling, to a certain degree, you gotta actually evaluate whether these ideas should be used. And it's overall easily the part that really makes me not sure how I feel about this movie. I think that's definitely where most of my mixed aspects come in. The stuff that I'm not sure how I feel, because in certain respects, I think some of that stuff's really cool. I don't want to discuss the subject matter and the nature of it because, again, I don't want spoilers, but it taps on a subject matter that actually kind of gets under my skin. Some of it I found very effective. Others, I think the straightforward stuff was actually the scarier stuff. But the way the movie unravels, though, is very well paced, very well portrayed. I think they did an amazing job of tracking you along on this story. I was never bored at any point, despite the fact that this is actually a bit of a slow movie, but you are very invested in what's going on with these characters. Every lead's very interesting to me, and there's a darkness to the characters that you can't help but be so invested in. But overall, I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on Longlegs, what you think of this movie. Definitely the most hyped, talked about horror movie all year. Was it overhyped for you? Did you enjoy it? I'd love to hear it. I'm GM Light. Have a good one.